The next speaker is a proven leader in education, governance, and cultural development. With a PhD from the University of the West Indies, a distinguished career in teaching, public administration, and policy development, bringing scientific precision and strategic leadership to every role she has held. Saint Anne's, the lady you all should be oh so proud of. And the PNM remains proud of our Lady Vice Chair, Dr. the Honorable Nyan Gadsby-Dolly.
Laventille is Morvant. PNM family. It is a pleasure to be here with you, political leader, General Secretary, Chairman of the People's National Movement, Deputy Political Leaders, Members of Parliament, coordinators, councillors, Alderman Richard Walcott, Chairman of the San Juan Laventille Regional Corporation, the entire PNM family that is here with us, and those who are viewing online. It is such a pleasure to be here with you. If you're feeling good this evening, say, great is the PNM. I want to start by reading a quote for you that is trending online now. Someone sent it to me and I saw it so many times. I think it's good for us to read this quote. I'm sure when I start to read it, you will be familiar with it. It says, out of hatred for the cockroach, the ants voted for the insecticide. Out of hatred for the cockroach, the ants voted for the insecticide. They all died, big on in the tail, including the housefly that didn't even vote. They all died, including the housefly that didn't even vote. It says an African proverb, but it could be a Trinidadian and Tobagonian proverb. It is so true of our situation here today. Oh, they have jokes, eh? PNM people have jokes today. People of Morvant Laventille, people of Trinidad and Tobago. Our nation's children are facing an impending crisis. And I want to call it out tonight. And I want to call on the Ministry of Education and the Minister of Education and let him know, the Honorable Dr. Dowler, that he has a responsibility to this nation as the Minister of Education to deal with the crisis that is facing our children. In 2020, he might try. In 2020, we had a crisis in this country. It was a global crisis. I want to remind us and take our minds back to that time. A difficult time. I remember sitting in the Parliament and hearing the Prime Minister at that time, Dr. Keith Rowley, say that we were going to close schools. It was supposed to be for a month in the first instance. Remember that? Schools closed for 2 years in this country. And that was the COVID-19 pandemic. That was a crisis in this country. I came in as Minister of Education in August of 2020, in the middle of the bacchanal. It wasn't an easy time for us. But we had to move quickly. We had to think on our feet. We had to consult with our stakeholders and come up with plans to deal with the situation that we were in. Unprecedented. Never experienced before by many of us. And we had to deal with that. I want to remind you, we had to find devices for our children. Remember that? We had the Adopt a School program. We had to find devices immediately because in no government process can you just go out and buy something like laptops by the parlor. So it would have taken the government some time to get the laptops that we needed. We asked the private sector to donate, and they donated over 40,000 devices. Let us give them a round of applause, the private sector. Because it was a crisis. We purchased laptops at a later time. Do you remember at that time, members of parliament who were operating at that time, the hampers that we used to get, the goods we used to get to help our population? Why? Because it was a crisis. At that time, the country stood still, but the needs of the most vulnerable were always paramount for the government, the PNM government. And even when our students returned to school in 2022, we faced another crisis, the learning loss situation. In 2022, we had the lowest grades that we have had for some time because we had children home, children who, even though they had devices, were not accustomed learning online. We had teachers learning to teach online even while they were teaching. A lot was going on globally. And we had to put things in place to help because it was a crisis. We had the vacation revision program. We had the remedial education program where we hired social workers, guidance counselors to help our children to re-socialize, to come back to school. We had the restorative justice because our children were now getting accustomed being out of their houses around other children. We had after-school tuition in our primary schools, 8A primary schools. We had a bookless freeze since that time because we knew parents couldn't afford this cycle of buying new books every year, and every year we froze the book list since then. And in 2024, as continuing on that trend, we introduced the book grants. So I'm telling you all of the things that the government did through the Ministry of Education, the PNM government, to respond to a crisis that we did not cause, a crisis that we could not predict, but that happened in Trinidad and Tobago, and we had to respond and respond quickly. I was appointed Minister of Education in August of 2020. By September 2020, we had the Adopt a School program, and devices were flowing through the Ministry of Education into our schools. 1 month. In June 2022, when we saw the results dip so low for the SEA, by July, we had the vacation revision program implemented. So I'm saying to you that in a crisis that we did not cause but had to respond to as a responsible government, how quickly and how agile the ministry had to move. A ministry with over 20,000 workers, a big ministry. And that's how the PNM did it. But we have a crisis today. We have a crisis, a self-imposed crisis. Over 40,000 workers were sent home by the UNC just over 2 months ago. And I want us to put it into context. When Caroni Limited closed, 9,000 workers were sent home. They received compensation. We know that. When Petrotrin closed, 5,000 workers or so were sent home in the restructuring exercise. Many of them came back into the new company, but they received compensation. So I'm telling you those numbers so you understand the scale of what happened over 2 months ago when 40,000 people were sent home without warning, without, of course, if you didn't have warning, far less for compensation or anything like that. So I want you to keep those numbers in your mind to understand the scale of what we are speaking about. If even half of those workers had 2 children in school, that is 40,000 children. Let that sink in. That is quarter of the population of school children in Trinidad and Tobago. I'm repeating it for you. 40,000 of our most vulnerable people sent home. If half of them had just 2 children in the school system, that is 40,000 children, a quarter of the children going to school now, who would be affected by this action? Imagine how those parents are feeling. And we saw what happened, the sad, sad example of what could happen when mental stress takes you, anxiety, frustration. I'm a member of parliament. I saw people today who have no idea how they are going to afford books for their children. But it's not just books. It's not just books. It's rent. It's food. It's transportation. It's uniform. And as much as you can try to do as a member of parliament, you can't meet all of that need. And I want us to think about the children, the 40,000 children who are living in homes with parents who are facing that reality. If a natural disaster had hit any part of Trinidad and Tobago, and 40,000 persons were affected, think about it. No government would ignore that. No government. If flooding, a hurricane passed over a particular part of Trinidad and Tobago and affected 40,000 people, that's 2 constituencies. No government would ignore that. They would start to speak about what grants we could give. They would start to look at how we could help rebuild. And if schools are opening as it is now, they would be looking to see how we could help the parents send their children to school. Am I wrong? Any government would have done that if a natural disaster had hit 40,000 people. But in our case, the unnatural disaster is who? The UNC. The unnatural disaster is the UNC. Hurricane UNC. And in this, anytime a hurricane comes around, we say, God is a Trini. It will pass us. This one gave us a direct hit, affecting 40,000 people and their children. The UNC gave no thought to what their action would do to these families. Because 2 months has passed. And I just told you, when we had a crisis that we could not predict, within a month, we were able to do things to help because, you see, we cared. And we knew that we wanted to help our citizens because we were the government. And that's what a P&M government does. But over 2 months has passed. What have you heard from the Minister of Education on this matter? Not a word. Not a word recognizing that there are as much as 40,000 children out there who are going to be going through this hell of not having what it takes to even get prepared for school, far less to get to school every day. Not a word. No plan. No preparation. Because they simply do not care. We can't sit by as a P&M and see this happen. The Prime Minister has said, indiscipline will not be tolerated in schools. And this is understandable. This is something that any Minister of Education, any Prime Minister would want to ensure they reduce. But you cannot create a situation where children are going to be hungry, angry, frustrated, left behind. You create the situation. And then you say that the effects of this you will not tolerate. Have you heard the Minister of Education speak about anything to deal with the crisis? This is a crisis. Because if children drop out, we are talking about 40,000 children. If children don't have money to go to school, what is their prospect for success? If they drop out of the system, what happens in a year, in 2 years, in 3 years? This is a crisis, a self-imposed crisis by the UNC, and they have said nothing about how they are going to deal with it. And I am very concerned. And all of us should be very concerned. Because we are 3 years past COVID and the experience of COVID, and we are still feeling the effects. I can tell you, I am a parent, and I know that my children are still feeling the effects of that. So what's going to happen in a couple years to this cohort of children who are going through this right now and whose parents have no prospects and no hope and are vulnerable and are unseen by a government who refuses to acknowledge the consequences of their callous actions? And I am calling on civil society. I'm calling on NGOs. This is not a PNM thing, you know. This is a country we're running. I want to tell Kamla Prasad-Bissessar the tears of these parents, the tears of these parents for the welfare of their children are going to fall on your head, Kamla Prasad-Bissessar. I want to call on the Minister of Education to account to the population. I have good information that no matter how the media tries to get him, they cannot get him to answer a question. When I was there, though, when you are called to serve, you are called to account. Hiding is not an option. Silence is not an option. You have to account to the population that put you there to work for them. The Ministry of Education and the minister must address this crisis. They must acknowledge that they have created a crisis for the children of this country, and they must tell us their plans to deal with the crisis. They must tell us how they are going to help the most vulnerable children who are exposed now because their parents are unable to give them the basics to complete their education. This crisis is all of our problem. And I call on all of us to speak up in defense of our children. It's not a PNM thing, it is a country thing. If 40,000 children fall out of the system, who is going to work in our professional spaces? Who is going to be there? And how are households going to escape the vicious cycle of poverty if they don't have a chance? You know, they say if you don't have a ticket, you don't have a chance. Education is the ticket. So when you attack education, when you attack our children in this way, you are really resigning a whole generation to failure. And we must recognize this as a crisis, and we must stand up in defense of it. I want to tell those who feel hopeless as I close tonight, I want to tell you to take courage. Because when we look at the wickedness perpetrated upon members of this society at all levels, sometimes we could feel hopeless. And you feel as though we have 5 years more to take this. But take courage. The PNM is here. The PNM is here, led by our leader, Penelope Robinson, Beckles Robinson, who will do what we have to do to bring this government to account. And in 5 years or less, the PNM will return to the governance of this country. Great is the PNM, and we shall prevail.